Welcome back to the Gentleman's Gazette. In today's interview, I speak with David Evans, a lawyer turned men's fashion blogger for men over 40. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you.
It's great to have you. Thanks for being here. And I think you're one of the very few men out there who actually focus on not the 20-year-olds or 30-year-olds, but older men. How did that happen? Tell us more about that.
Well, I have absolutely no background in fashion or menswear or anything like that. In fact, 5 years ago, if we'd been talking, you probably would have thought that I was rather badly dressed. So about 5 years ago, I decided I wanted to do some writing. I decided I had a book in me. And I thought I'd start a blog to practice my writing, really. So the next question was, well, what shall I write about?
Oh, really? So you just said, I want to write a book, but you had no idea what you wanted to write about?
Absolutely, yes. And the blog was really just to practice my writing skills and to perhaps, put together a few ideas and hone them. And I thought of all sorts of things. I'm a very keen cyclist, so I thought of a cycling blog and a host of other things. But I think I thought that it would be interesting to talk about something I know very little about, and something that maybe I could talk about with a little bit of humour. Because after the age of 40, men find it quite hard knowing what to dress in, where to buy their clothes and so on. And I just thought, if it made the blog a bit of a sort of journey of discovery, then maybe that would engage the readers. So that very briefly is how it started.
All right. And, I went through your blog and I looked at your inaugural post, and you mentioned the influence of your mother and the Sartorialist. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. Indeed, yes. Just trying to find inspiration for how I should dress to look a little bit better than I did. I went on to Google, as I suppose most men would do, and I very quickly found the Sartorialist and those wonderful photographs he took a few years ago of older men at Pitti Uomo in Florence, and that was really my first inspiration. But although I say I really had no interest in menswear or clothes or so on, I think there must have been a spark of it there somewhere, because my mother was a very sort of artistic and stylish woman. And I suspect that some of that influence probably rubbed off on me when I was much, much younger.
I see. Okay, that's good. So, but your background is law. Is that right? What did you do before?
Yeah, I did a law degree at university, and then became a lawyer. I was in the branch of law that we call solicitors over here, and I did that for approaching 30 years probably, and then about 10-12 years ago I decided I wanted to do something else, and so I retrained as a teacher, and I taught in a primary school, which for us over here is for children up to the age of 11, for a few years. And I still do a little bit of teaching, but otherwise I'm now semi-retired, really. So I like to think of myself as a blogger who's also an ex-teacher and an ex-lawyer.
Oh, wonderful. That's good. So how old are you now?
I'm 61 and a quarter.
Okay. So yeah, you definitely did go through the stages of 40 plus, 50 plus, and now 60 plus. So you have the experience.
Indeed, yes, and it's quite interesting looking at the demographic of the readers of my blog, because on Google Analytics, because the largest chunk of my readers are sort of aged about 40 to 55 or something, and then it begins to tail off after 60. So I'm wondering whether I'll ever get to the stage where I'm much, much older than the vast bulk of my readers, which could be quite interesting. And maybe at that stage I have to hand over to somebody younger. I don't know. But
but you can, at least you've been there, so you've been in your 40s, so you know what it felt like. If I write about men's fashion for 40 plus and I'm in my 30s, it's, I think, less credible.
Yeah, I'm not so sure, really. I think nowadays menswear has such a sort of classic basis that you can be almost any age and write about it. To my surprise, I've got quite a high percentage of readers in their 20s. And I think from the few that I've spoken to, what they appreciate is, the suits, the brogues, the ties, the pocket squares. And there is a sizable number of young men in their 20s and sort of early 30s who do dress that way. I know it's the same with you over in the States. So in a way that qualifies you almost whatever age you are to write about those things.
That's true. And sometimes, maybe if you have a baby face and you intentionally want to look older, so dress can be part of that. And I think there is, this tendency in fashion ads to go young, but sometimes, especially for men, it's advantageous to look a little more seasoned. And you mentioned P.T. Uomo. We did in fact do a piece on the more seasoned gentlemen and how they dress versus the 20-year-olds, because it is different. It's more, I would say, flashy and flamboyant than the average 60-year-old would dress. But I think everybody at P.T. Uomo is dressed differently than a regular person. So it just makes sense. It kind of fits in.
Yes, I suppose what's interesting is that most of the men at Pitti Uomo are probably involved in some way in the sort of menswear and fashion industry, so they probably tend to dress that way. And I think probably what I'm trying to look for is a style that men on the street can dress in without necessarily feeling too self-conscious. And you can take elements from what the men are wearing at Pitti Uomo, but perhaps not go quite as extreme.
On a more personal level, like, what were the challenges you experienced with your wardrobe or your dress once you turned 40?
I think when I was 40, which of course 21 years ago now, I certainly didn't have the interesting clothes as I do now. But thinking back that sort of period of time, even without that sort of all-consuming interest that maybe I have now, that passion for clothes, because you're in that transition from being young to being older, there is a worry about whether you can wear that T-shirt or those shorts or those trainers. Now I'm older, should I be really wearing these things? Mm-hmm. And there are concerns that seem to sort of come to dominate your existence in many ways. And I think it's all sort of encouraged by the menswear industry, which, as you touched on earlier, tends to just advertise to much younger men. Most models are probably in their early 20s in menswear adverts. And I think that all that probably promotes a sort of a slight feeling of concern in the older man. If it's only younger men who are wearing these things, what should I be wearing?
Exactly, and there's just this void where you just don't know what's going on.
Precisely, yeah, exactly.
So you probably have a chance, to speak to your readers or exchange emails. What are the concerns or challenges they have? What do you hear over and over again?
Interestingly, it's quite often price. A lot of men, there seems to be, particularly over here, I don't know whether it's the same with you in the States, there seems to be a real feeling that there's a right to buy cheap clothing. So if I write about something which is fairly pricey, I will certainly get a few people commenting that they can buy similar stuff from X on the high street for sort of a tenth of the price. So although I try and cover on the blog clothing of all prices, I do find it's one of the most regular comments that I get from my readers, the price of something. And I do occasionally try to make the point that something costs more for a reason. It's because it's good quality, it's going to last longer, it's going to fit better, the quality of the materials is going to be better.
That's true. So, made in the UK, you mentioned it, or you said made in UK, made in England. Sometimes you hear these stories of made in UK, made in Mauritius, or label fraud. When you say made in UK, you mean mostly made in England. Is that right?
No, I mean made in any of the countries of the United Kingdom. So, Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, or England.
Okay.
That's what I'm talking about, really. And I have on my blog a list of British-made menswear, and I'm really looking at companies that supply or make menswear within those 4 countries.
And so how do you think this is special, compared to, let's say, made in Italy, made in France, made in Germany, made in the US, made in Japan? Like, what makes it special for you?
Oh, I don't think I'm claiming it's special in the sense that it's better. I'm writing about it because it's my country, and I suppose I'm interested in it because it is, because it is a British thing. It would be equally easy to write about the menswear that's made in Japan or France or the States, where there are very similar movements, I understand. Even in China, I gather that there's a rise in the sort of pride in made in China clothing, and some of it is very good quality. So, if I lived in the States, I'd probably be doing something very similar, but for American-made menswear, the sort of little artisan workshops that are producing denim and so on, would be of great interest to me.
Yes, but, you're right. There's a big movement here too, like just having these kind of boots and jeans and shirts and so forth.
I think there is a sort of pride to wearing stuff that is made in your country, and you can sort of think, well, I am helping the economy, I am helping employment, and in a way, maybe that's more rewarding than helping the economies of countries that are thousands of miles away. I don't know.
So we take a step back from the British UK made,
Sure,
and talk more about age-appropriate clothing. How would you define that?
Well, I think looking at it from my perspective as the older man, to me, and I know many disagree with this, to me, age-appropriate clothing is something that's fairly classic in terms of its cut and its style, not too extreme. But, having said that, what interests me is that I know men of my age who do wear Converse and very tight jeans and Harrington jackets, or whatever, and they look great in it. So one of the things I haven't yet quite got my finger on is why they look so good in what would otherwise be clothing which would be worn exclusively by younger men. Some men manage it and others don't.
So would you say men never get too old for denim and sneakers?
No, well, I don't think they do. No, why should denim be the preserve of the young man? I mean, denim has been around longer than any of us, and jeans have been around longer than any man on the planet. It seems quite wrong that it should just be seen as something that's exclusively for young men. And the older man may want to choose the slightly more relaxed fits and so on. Because there's no doubt you get to an age where your shape changes and you may not look great in a really tight pair of jeans. But I don't see why men of any age shouldn't wear jeans, and the same with sneakers, with trainers.
Okay, so when men get older, right, things change. You lose your hair, it turns gray, your metabolism slows down.
Yeah.
Let's assume you've already, developed a wardrobe in your 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
You now have to change once you get into your 40s and 50s.
Yes. I think that's a slow process. I don't think, you wake up one morning and throw open the doors of your wardrobe and think, oh, I can't wear any of this. It happens slowly. Suddenly, you're no longer a 32-inch waist, and you might become a 34-inch waist, and then a few years later a 36, and so on. It goes on like that. So I think it sort of happens slowly. So you adapt your style slowly, and as your clothes wear out, you change them.
Are there any colors that work particularly well with gray hair in your experience?
I quite like that sort of grey silver vibe with grey hair. So maybe a grey flannel suit, but then you can pick out a bit of colour in the pocket square and the tie and so on. I quite like dark blue. I'm wearing a denim shirt and a sort of chambray pocket square at the moment with a sort of silvery grey linen jacket. I think the great thing about grey hair is that almost anything will go with it. So, but you probably want to try and bring out a little bit of colour, maybe just in pops of colour around the place in the tie and accessories and so on.
Do you find that there are certain patterns that work better now for you that you have gray hair than before?
That's quite a difficult question, because I think patterns as a concept was something that I never really thought about longer than 5 years ago anyway. So I have no real experience of how I would have treated pattern when I had, my original hair color. Again, I think probably I can't really see that having grey hair would make a great deal of difference, to be quite honest.
Okay.
I do quite like, I like pattern, I like checks, I like Glen checks and sort of herringbone and so on. And the nice thing about those is so many of them do have a grey base to them, so they do go well with grey hair. And then, as we were saying earlier, you can bring out the colour in a nice paisley tie or a pocket square or in a striped shirt or something.
That's a good point. How about socks? I've heard like older men tell me, I got these socks with some color, and now I get compliments all the time. Is that something you've experienced as well?
Yeah, I do wear coloured socks. I tend to wear plain coloured socks. I'm not a great lover of patterned socks. I think that's something you've got to be very, very careful with. I remember in my less educated days, sort of in the 80s, I used to wear, with my pinstripe suit as a lawyer, I used to wear sort of Disney patterned socks, which I think about now and I just cringe, but so I think that probably gave me a disliking for patterned socks. But yes, I think it can be really interesting to play with colour, because we were talking earlier about the grey suit, the grey hair, maybe a white shirt, and then you could wear maybe a bright blue paisley tie and a bright blue pair of socks with a pair of black shoes. And, suddenly what is a very grey look is just lifted by 2 items of clothing, 2 accessories, which bring a little pop of bright cobalt blue or whatever it is to the look. And I think it can really work well.
So there's always a kind of series of questions that we ask people. And it's just like simple, one or the other. And so let's see. So Oxford or Derby?
For me, it's Derby, simply because the shape of the Oxford isn't so suitable for my poor injured foot. So Derby.
Okay. Flannel or worsted?
Either. It's going to, for me, it's going to entirely depend on the colour, the shape, and so on. And I have no particular preference of the type of cloth in that sense.
Good. How necktie or bow tie?
No. I unfortunately, I put bow ties in the same sort of category as cravats. But it's something for me to experiment with sometime.
Absolutely. Belt or suspenders?
Well, it's interesting. I've just started to experiment with what we call braces and you called suspenders. I've just had a suit made with buttons for braces for suspenders, and I really just tried them out for the first time last week. So this is a very timely question, and I have to say I really enjoyed the experience. Inevitably, I had the braces too tight to start with, and I loosened them and loosened them and loosened them, and ended up with something that was very, very comfortable. So I think I'll probably be using those a lot more. But for the time being, I'd have to say belt.
All right. Barrel cuff or French cuff?
It entirely depends on the circumstances. You know, I'll wear a French cuff, which I think is what we call a double cuff, for something fairly formal. So it's sort of horses for courses on that one for me.
Right. Undershirt or no undershirt?
Generally, no, unless it's very cold, in which case I will wear an undershirt, what we call a vest, but you call a vest something else. So we sort of got this transatlantic terminology clash here, haven't we?
Exactly, yeah. So off the rack or bespoke?
I'd love to say bespoke, but you know, like any other man, I couldn't afford to be bespoke all the time. So I'd have to say sort of off the rack. Although my preference would be to have bespoke.
So tell us more about your current wardrobe. What does it consist of? What does it look like in terms of ratio, bespoke, made to measure, ready to wear?
At the moment, it's very little bespoke. Most of it, there's a fair amount of made-to-measure suits. The vast majority of it is off the peg. Of course, being a blogger, I get quite a lot of stuff given to me, to the extent where, you know, now if I'm offered a gift by a PR company or a brand, I tend to sort of slightly say, "Oh no, not another shirt," or, you know, pair of socks or whatever it is. Though having said that, I think it's actually probably a smaller wardrobe than you would expect from a blogger, because I tend to have this rule that as some stuff comes in at the bottom, it goes out at the top, and I take it off to a charity shop, I think what you would call a thrift shop. So I try and keep a fairly small selection, partly because my wardrobe is physically quite small.
So how many suits and sport coats do you have right now?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've probably got about 4 or 5 suits, maybe 6 suits, about the same number of sports coats, maybe 20 shirts, 2 or 3 waistcoats, vests as you would call them, probably about 15 pairs of brogues, hundreds of pairs of socks. What else haven't I mentioned? Probably about 40 ties, something like that. Probably about 60 pocket squares, all stuffed in a drawer. And maybe 5 or 6 pairs of chinos, 3 pairs of denim jeans, pair of trainers, about 4 or 5 bags of various sorts: leather, tweed, shoulder bags, handbags,
accessories, basically, and stuff. It's cool. Yeah.
You know, not a huge wardrobe really. And probably if I was going to have a wardrobe of choice, it would be sort of 3 bespoke suits, 1 for summer, 1 for very formal, and 1 for sort of in between, and, you know, maybe 10 handmade shirts from Turnbull and Asser or something, you know. But it never quite works out like that, does it?
Yeah, but you mentioned a suit that was being made for you. Tell us more about that, like pattern and then who makes it. And
I've had my first sort of proper bespoke suit was a very nice tweed suit made for me by a tailor in Clerkenwell in East London, which very unfortunately I lost the trousers, I lost the pants on the bus somewhere after I'd taken them to be repaired. So my one bespoke suit is just a jacket at the moment. But I've got 3 or 4 suits which were made for me and offered to me as a blogger, made to measure, various services where one of them is a service where you sort of enter all your measurements online and the suit eventually appears. Another one was a combination of that and you're going to a fitting. And it's quite interesting. Those suits are, you know, they fit reasonably well, but not as well, obviously, as a bespoke suit would fit. I am having a bespoke morning coat and trousers made at the moment by a tailor's called Cadden the Dandy in Savile Row, and that's for my daughter's wedding. I'm also in the middle of a very interesting project with Johnstons of Elgin, who are in Scotland, and they weave cloth. And they very kindly invited me to help to work with them to design a cloth. And I'm then going to have that made into a suit by Dejan Skinner, who are very well established tailors on Savile Row. And the cloth,
yes, that's good.
And the cloth is sort of a Prince of Wales check sort of variation. So that for me is very exciting, because it's a new departure for me to have a truly Savile Row bespoke suit. But that won't be ready till the end of the year, unfortunately.
All right. Well, that sounds very exciting, though. What other things do you have planned for the Grey Fox block in the future?
Well, one thing I started to do last year was some photo shoots where I borrow or call in, or I'm given clothing by a brand, and then I work with a friend of mine who's a superb personal stylist and a photographer, and I'm just photographed wearing their products. And the reason I do that is linked to this concern I have that so many of these brands are just using very young models to sell their products, and so the older man doesn't really get a chance to see that, you know, they do look good on the older man, hopefully. So that's something I want to do a little bit more of. I'm also, interestingly, being asked to do various sort of talks and hosted events, which is quite interesting. You know, being put forward as the guru, the expert, which I don't really think I am, but that's a very interesting experience for me to sort of pass on the results of my journey so far to other men in a similar position to me. So there's plenty happening, in a way almost too much. I think being a successful blogger when you're on your own can be great fun, but it also brings a lot of pressure. I mean, every day I get you know, a dozen or two emails asking me to work with brands or to write about products, and I'm sure you get exactly the same thing. And when you're on your own, it can be very difficult to deal with that, simply because you haven't got enough hours in the day to deal with the administration, the emails, and so on. So all that is a challenge which I'm still sort of trying to work on at the moment. And part of that is
some help. That's good.
Well, part of it is thinking about whether a blog should be commercialized and how it can be commercialized. Because I think when you're a personal blogger in my position, people do like to think that what they're getting is your personal opinion rather than the opinion that's been paid for. And so, you know, as a blog that's just sort of came to the stage maybe last year of being fairly widely known, I don't want to sort of stunt the blog's development by being suddenly too commercial. So I'm not complaining. It's a very interesting period to be going through as a blogger, and I really find the whole thing very stimulating and enjoyable.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for the interview, David. I thought it was very interesting.
It's a pleasure, Raphael. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you very much, David.